Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Rubin. I'm the president of the Pinole Historical Society and Pinole History Museum. Welcome to our third online Zoom program. And this is a very special one because Mike Woldemar, who built pretty much everything in Pinole since the city was incorporated in 1903, is here tonight. And he is going to run through some of the wonderful structures that he's designed and built that helps make this city look as wonderful as it is. So, just a couple of ground rules. If you have any questions, use the chat button, which is on your control panel, and Mike will answer these questions at the end of the presentation. This recording will be uploaded to the Pinole Historical Society website, and it will also be uploaded to the Pinole Historical Society YouTube channel. So if you want to look at it again, or if you have some friends who wanted to be in on this and for some reason they weren't able to, you can tell them that's where they can look, and that'll be done within the next couple of days. So, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mike Woldemar. He is a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley with an honors degree in architecture. He established Mike Woldemar and Associates in 1975. He was the city architect for the city of Hercules for 13 years. He served on the City of Richmond Design Review Board for more than 24 years. And his firm has provided a wide range of services for single-family and multi-family residential, office, commercial, and industrial buildings and projects. And you're going to see a whole bunch of them today. So, Michael, take it away. Mike, you're muted.
No.
Got it. Can you
There
hear
you
me
go.
now?
We can hear you now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Starting over, Jeff, thanks for the opportunity to show some of the projects that
No.
we did in and for the city of Pinole. A little bit of front-end work. I'd like to thank all of our clients. As you might imagine, the clients, when they were good, they were also generated good projects, and you'll see some of those tonight. A little bit of thanks to the contractors who built these projects. We ended up finding out that they knew how to read plans pretty well, and they built it pretty well. Thanks to the city staff members and those folks that helped guide these projects through the process. Those included people like Dave Dowswell, who's long gone down the road, Mary Drosba, Mark Grisham, and a whole bunch of others that I decided I shouldn't really name all of these folks because it might be embarrassing. Thanks to Earl Combs. Earl took a lot of the drone aerial photographs that you'll see tonight.
Oh,
And of course, thanks to Jeff, frankly, for asking me. That was a nice, very pleasurable to get the phone call back in, what was it, December, January. It was a good thing. For the format of my presentations tonight, I'll generally show views of projects following a trip along San Pablo Avenue from west to east, with a few side trips and maybe a few stories along the way about those projects. Let's start with the first slide, Jeff.
Okay, hang on.
Here's where the magic happens. That used to be a job sign that we didn't use. This first project is the Del Monte Shopping Center, and we did a master plan.
I can't. I have to go clear back out.
Sorry,
I should have
couldn't
did it before I went in.
Please mute yourself.
I can't hear one.
We'll set up here.
I can't hear.
Want me to go back out and do it again?
Just hang on.
Jeff, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Can it,
The first project that I'm going to look at here is the Del Monte Shopping Center, of which this is the first slide. You can see the old wagon wheel building in the background, plus the wagon wheel sign, which was rather a treasure. The client here was John Donconix. John was one of my best private clients that we had over the years, and we did a number of projects, some of which you'll see further tonight. The wagon wheel and bar and restaurant was built before World War I and was known at the time as the Hunter's Inn. That building apparently also served as a bootleg operation during Prohibition. Somehow that all fits in with the old character of the place. It was demolished, burned down by the fire department as an exercise in 1984. The overall project of master plan is this view, which concluded about 5 different buildings. On the right side is where the Japanese restaurants are, and going next to the next slide on the left side is the Embers restaurant. That was one of the first buildings, first restaurants that we did over the years. There were a lot of interior improvements for various tenants throughout the whole project. I got to know a lot of those folks very well. It's particularly nice to go back to the New Deli and get sandwiches there because they always recognize, well, I know who that guy is. The other interesting thing about this project is that for the same client, we also designed buildings on the other 3 corners of the site. Big O Tires, and there's an auto service guy and several other tenants there. It's just kind of a proud thing to have done all 4 corners of the building, of the project. The next slide is for what's called Crocketts Premier Auto Body, and it's another master plan that we did. It has multiple tenants in it. The original site was wide open, vacant, with 1 small building sort of sitting down in the front of the site. And the back of the site was a steep hillside leading up to the condominiums at the top of the hill. And we obviously had to do a significant amount of grading just simply to find room to put buildings and parking. The first phase of the project was on the left side was the auto body facility for Tom Welsh. He moved his business from down literally in Crockett to Pinole and has been very successful at it since then. The second phase of the project was for animal control, the county building, and it is right out on the corner on the far right-hand side of the project. Of particular interest for me was designing the building and then making sure that it worked in concert with the county's architect so that everybody's requirements, both the builder and owner, as well as the county, were all met. The next slide is a Liberty office building. This is done for a multi-tenant, as a multi-tenant space. There are 2 floors, and you can see from here, the client here was a lady named Margie Liberty. And Margie is a delightful lady. She was a great client and really special to work with. And so she allowed me to do a number of things to kind of create the character of this building. The site itself was kind of difficult. When you see this building from down on the street on Appian Way, you actually look up to the parking area. And then you go past the building and you go back down to a lower parking area. It was tough to make all of those pieces work. 2 stories to the front, which gave it its character, but also a 3-story section to the back of the building. Next, Sheriff. Okay, this building is another Donconics project. Again, a multi-story office building. The building was built originally in two parts, and you can kind of see a joint right in the middle of the two lengths of buildings. That joint was actually an elevator that was added at a later date to connect the two buildings, and frankly, to make the tenants on the upper floor accessible for handicap access using the elevator. Of particular interest in this building is that the exterior of the building is horizontal siding. That siding was created by splitting 3x8 redwood. That redwood came from an old roofing project in a warehouse in the Richmond Marina. The resawn surface, as you ran that thing through the bandsaw, the resawn surface was used inward, and excuse me, the other way around. The resawn surface was used on the outside, and the roofing part of the wood was on the interior side. This, by the way, was the same material that we used on the old Schober's restaurant building that you might remember kind of across from where Kaiser is now. Also, more of a personal note, but I used that same redwood material as the loft in my old office building. Vintage Square was a two-story multi-tenant commercial building. It's along San Pablo Avenue. The clients were Steve and Patricia Skillman, who were great people to work with. They actually, again, another client that allowed me to go ahead and do the things that I thought was appropriate for that area. Starting off this project was the need to relocate 2 Canary Island date palm trees. We moved them under a separate contract to some adjacent properties, and it was the first time I'd ever been involved in trying to move a palm tree. It was pretty interesting. The front building that you see here on the slide contains tenants, both top and bottom floor. The rear building behind this one was designed principally to house the client's fire sprinkler business, with a warehouse on the ground floor and offices on the second floor. The parking lie in between the two buildings, and you actually access it from a side street or from San Pablo Avenue. On the last slide here is the corner detail of the front building, but of particular note was the pedestal on the corner. They allowed me to do a whole sign program for the building to determine where and what kinds of signs should be there. And we came up with the idea of identifying the whole project with this pedestal out in the front corner. Heritage Park is a larger project that I was involved in. The client in this case was the City of Pinole Redevelopment Agency. And there were several different players, several different meetings involved in the whole thing. The next several slides that you'll see are included to illustrate the kinds of drawings that we needed to do to secure approvals for the project from the planning department, from the design review board, from the planning commission, and from the city council. The park itself was intended to create a mid-block pedestrian path that extends to various locations around the city. It starts on the south end or left-hand end of the drawing, right by where the Faria house was to be located, and it ended with the 3 houses on the north end. These 3 houses were designed to recall the character of old-time Pinole with a contemporary flavor to it. Click, Jeff, to the next slide.
I'm just having
I skipped one here, but the site plan just shows you the 3 houses. This is an elevation of the 3 houses. And what's of interest on the next slide is it shows the kind of landscaping that was really, in fact, in front of these projects, this project that we had to work around. the parking on the street was actually designed to happen in between various tree trunks.
Hang on for a moment, Mike. I gotta
Yes,
stop
sir.
the screen share for a minute,
Not a problem.
and I've got to eliminate something here. So I apologize for that, but I am having a bit of a technical difficulty. Okay,
20 minutes before.
okay, and now we are back. Okay, that's where we left off.
There. Okay, next slide from there gives you the real view of two of the three houses from the street. And I think, again, I'm repeating the character idea that we tried to build into it. These were sold by the city redevelopment agency to low and moderate income buyers very quickly on their completion. I think generally people like these houses, and I know it was one of my favorite projects. Next to the Faria house, which we saw, several slides here. First with the Faria house up on the hill, coming down the hill, again, right by where Kaiser is now. We started on a Saturday morning about 7 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning to move this house across town. Its next slide shows us coming around the corner at Tenet Avenue and San Pablo Avenue. And it was really interesting to see this sort of giant box on wheels. We fit the site into this picture, which is the original condition to the property before we got there. We did on the next slide, a rendering just to show folks what it would look like in that particular location. And it turned out to be pretty accurate. Of course, when we moved the house, the front porch had to come off because they couldn't move it and hold it together with the rest of the house. So we started off by, after a new foundation, put in a whole front porch. And the next slide shows the completed project. That completed project included white picket fences, an entry trellis, and a rose garden to create a focus on the front of the house. I would just note that the rose garden is continually being maintained now by the Pinole Garden Club. Next slide is for Christ the Lord Episcopal Church. This was done in about 1998, and it basically consisted of remodeling and then a bigger addition. The remodeling included a new foundation. The whole building was sort of settling down under the earth that was in that place. We also remodeled the front altar in the interior of the church. We added a new building to the west end of the building, which is on this slide just to the left, that has been used, I think, since the building was open on a weekday use from the Las Casitas preschool facility. And again, one of these personal notes, but 3 of my grandchildren went to school there before they went on to the school district buildings. The original building we had back, sorry, I was just jumping around. This slide indicates one of the major things that we did. You can see a little bit sticking up above the trees on the left side of that photograph, but we created a whole new entry to the building. Next, yeah, and that entry passes straight through from the street side through a 2-story high space out to the parking lot on the outside. And it created a front focus to the whole entry and arrival at the school, at the church. And was always very pleased with this building because it was nice to work with all the folks, and a little bit of committee work that was very useful in the whole project. Around the corner is Memorial Hall, or as it's also known as the Community Playhouse. This was a project that we did some remodeling to, as well as some additional work. The work included a remodeling of the kitchen, the restroom renovations to the building, a new exterior lighting, and new signage for the building. It's used by the Pinole community players. And I would note that we added this entry structure. You can see it in this slide where it says Memorial Hall. We were trying to create a marquee of sorts to announce the building. That device that we used is also visible from San Pablo Avenue as you look down Tenet towards this building. Unfortunately, right at the moment, the red color, the awning on the top is missing, and I hope someday we'll get an opportunity to be replaced. I just took a pause to take a little bit of water. The next building I want to talk about is the Pinole Youth Center, which is actually going immediately to the right of the Memorial Hall. It shows a building that had a series of columns and all. That building was removed next to Memorial Hall. It turned out to be one of the buildings that I first worked on with Don Conix at a time to remodel the interior of it. That slide shows the Community Playhouse and the vacant lot that turns out to be next door. And you'll see more of that in just a moment. The last slide is of the building Youth Center in its near completed fashion. Note that the solar rooftop collectors that have been added since this original building was built. It also indicates how there's this covered arcade working from the left to the right, from Tenet Avenue out to Fernandez Park, creating one more of these pathways around the city to take a look at what's going on. The last slide shows both Memorial Hall and the Youth Center and shows how they were intended to work together visually to tie together. Notice the brick walls along the front, notice the shape of the roofs, all of this trying to make it look like one building, which in fact is two buildings. Right next door to where we were just looking is the Park Place mixed-use building, which is a building that has commercial spaces on the ground floor and apartments on the second floor. Before we ever got a chance to get at it, there was this Walton's Livery and Feed Stable, which I think is just a great old photograph of the thing. We were told, or I was told, that Walton provided the first taxi service in Pinole. Now, I can imagine that was a horse and buggy thing, like sitting out in front. The stable was first removed, and then later, the L-shaped building that we saw just a moment ago was also removed, and they cleared the space for what we call is the Park Place building. Tenants that were in the last building that was there were relocated to several other buildings in the city that I designed. So again, it was partially knowing these people and how to make them happy with it. This project had an interesting history to it. We, meaning the staff and I, met out on the site. I think we were sitting on the arcade at the youth center, and I brought my yellow paper sketch paper along, and we started talking about what should a building do here. And I made up a series of cartoon sketches almost. And sure enough, when we got all finished with it, those sketches were just about the same as the design of the building as it turned out here. The new building includes rear walkway connections to down into Fernandez Park, as well as the second floor octagonal turrets on the two diagonal corners. You can see one of them here on the right side. Back on the back side left is another turret that overlooks the park. All of those spaces on the top floor were part of residential units that created some really nice views of that area. It's of particular interest, again, that the turrets, too fast, one more, there we go. The turrets were actually patterned off of the Captain's Cottage building, which you'll see in a little while. But also of another sort of personal note, my house in Richmond has as its front corner a turret on it that's very similar in shape to the ones shown here. We also did, and you can see an example of it here with the trellis, the arch trellis, but we designed a whole series of railings, parking entrances, project arches, small children's play areas, and various plaza spaces that were included for this project and others in and around the downtown. Now we're talking, this is going to be a discussion about the Pear Street Bistro, which again is one of these mixed-use buildings. But originally there was the Lewis, if I pronounce this right, roof building, who apparently was a very, very important person in the downtown area originally. He served on the city council for some 32 years, which is pretty amazing in itself. The building was built in 1914, but it was condemned as a result of the 1989 earthquake and was removed shortly after that. Another personal note, I'm sorry to keep plugging these in, but it's sort of what I lived with. A lot of the bricks that came out of the demolition of the building ended up as pavement in my backyard. That was also part of the fee. Bill's Liquors, which is a tenant in this old building, actually was moved across the street to Parkview Plaza and continues to this day. The building became Pear Street Bistro, which I'm sure a lot of you all are familiar with. It had a few unique features. The distance between the right-hand side of our building and the left-hand side of the old Pinole Bank building was very close, and we were required to add fire sprinklers to the exterior of our building to provide for better fire protection in case there was ever an emergency between either one of the two buildings. The surface access and parking are both to the south and the back side of this building. The parking itself now serves as the farmer's market on Saturdays. Originally, there was a pedestrian walkway on the west side of the building that was at one time converted and closed off to create an outdoor dining area. It's my understanding is it's now open again. And lastly, as a historical note, the bar in the interior of the restaurant was totally restored from an old San Francisco drinking establishment. It's a beautiful piece of woodwork, and if you haven't been there to see it, that's well worth, aside from the restaurant and everything, it's well worth just seeing the bar. Next is one of the largest projects that I did in Pinole. We start off with two old buildings, one called Rinks Theater, and it's too bad that there isn't still a theater downtown that would bring more people to the downtown area, particularly in the evening, to use the additional restaurants that we have. Next to that was something called the Club Alibi. And I particularly remember this building very vaguely. I think it's kind of interesting to note that the telephone poles are still there, and of course they're all gone. There's an older vintage Volkswagen sitting there, which kind of fits in with the character of it all. To the next slide is an overall building of what we call Fernandez Center. And the design of the building started out as one big building. You would have seen a full, everything looked the same, worked together. But it was later changed just simply to provide a little bit more interest and more character to things, into the two buildings that you can see now here, the 3-story and the 2-story. We also did, and you'll see part of it as we get closer in, an overall sign program for the downtown area, including making sure that there was going to be consistency in the signs from one tenant to the next. Next. This is the 2-story building, which basically had some commercial space on the ground floor and apartments on the upper floor. Some of the apartments had outdoor balcony space. Some of them overlooked down on the left-hand end, the Pinole Creek. As part of that project, or part of that end of the project, there is a pedestrian trail that we put in all along Pinole Creek to continue the walkway surrounding the Old Town area. The 3-story building, again, commercial on the ground floor. The first tenant in the project was, what was it, Scrapping with Mommy and Me. It was a scrapbook group, and I wish they had stayed longer because it was a nice little tenant. We redid, as part of this 3-story building, and you can see it over on the lower right corner, we redid the Fernandez Avenue Street to provide for more friendly pedestrian walkways, wider sidewalks and all. And that was a plan idea that was going to go further into the rest of the parking areas in the back. Unfortunately, it was never able to happen. This is an interesting building to me. It's, again, a mixed-use building. The client was a guy named Ken Osman. Ken owned the auto body shop, or automobile repair shop, just across the street. The shape, which you could consider as kind of unusual on the east side or left side, was an evolution from discussions that we had with neighbors and not wanting to cast shadows onto this beautiful garden that they had. So we basically designed the building as a 2-story element with a 1-story lean-to roof off to the left, keeping the sunshine being able to drop in there. Parking for the building was located around on the back of the building or on the street parking. It later changed. The colors were changed and the signage was changed to the better, perhaps, or not to the better, well for the better. It became a shop, a coffee house, and I think is doing fairly well. I know that there's takeouts at the window underneath the arch. Almost across the street from that building is this older slide of, you can see a lot of Pinole in this older slide, but on the lower right is the old Captain's Cottage mixed-use building. We ended up evolving the building into a commercial tenant on the main floor with residential down in the basement and residential up on the second floor. Note the turret that was on the old slide is there also on the new picture. The original tenant in the ground floor was actually a group of ladies who started a tea house. And that's why it was called Captain's Cottage Tea House, obviously. Currently, it's the old-time realtor office. This is another project where we had to do things that added to the building in terms of stairways, ramps, fencing, and you can see the white works there on the right side coming off the parking lot. The next project is what's called Pinole Depot Shopping Center. This was one of the first shopping centers that I had been involved in. The client here was a guy named Mr. Ed Wimenosi, and Ed was particularly interested in doing something that brought a little bit of the Old Town character across the freeway. And so that resulted in us building with these arches and the covered arcade and You'll see it in another slide here shortly, but in the roof lines. That shows the overall building. Now to the other end of the building, this is where the Red Onion restaurant is. And of particular note is the roof lines and the facades on the roofs. I grew up in Petaluma, and in Petaluma there's a fine old railroad depot, and it has a whole lot of the same character. Obviously, there's nothing new. You come up with things that you've experienced. The last project to show is the Pinole Library. We did some additions and remodelings to the library. This slide shows the bigger view of it. This is one of Earl's, Earl's photographs from the drone. But you can see in the front, there are several columns. That was there simply to create a new covered entryway to the library, to the existing library, as well as rain cover so that you could stand and not have to fumble with your keys and all. Subsequently, they redid the parking relatively recently to locate the entrance to the parking right opposite the entrance into the senior high school area. The last slide, this is the entry structure I was just talking about, a couple of benches. In this last slide is an interior view, and it's the only interior that I brought along in any of this. What you can see here is that we did a series of layouts of the bookshelves on a diagonal basis. This diagonal basis provided better visibility and better security from the main staff locations, the checkout counter, all of that. Obviously, the library gets a significant amount of use from the high school across the street. Well, interestingly for me, the diagonal concept we used later in 3 other libraries in the county. One last thing I'd like to comment on. So we're rapidly approaching the end here, folks. I've shown you 17 projects in my presentation tonight. Note that there were at least 12 additional Pinole projects that were also built. We just haven't included those tonight. In addition, there are at least that many more that were not built. All of these projects were the result of the client's visions and concepts, along with a little help from me. I'd like to leave you with one more vision that didn't get built, unfortunately. I'd like to continue with the idea of a walking tour around downtown Pinole. That vision that I'd like you to think about includes a community garden. Imagine, if you would, that you're crossing the bridge from the west side of the senior center, turning right on the west side of Pinole Creek, turning left just before the railroad trestle, and walking past a community garden full of vegetable planters. Notice how accessible they would be to the community center. As you proceed along a trail with seating along the trail overlooking the baseball outfield, you would pass through a small fruit orchard and turn left onto Tennant Avenue to continue to walk on downtown. I think this would be another goal that could come out of some of this stuff, to continue that walkway around to town. Lastly, and again, thanks to Jeff for this opportunity to show some of these projects. Let's end with some questions that you all may have.
Okay, so I am going to stop sharing. And if you have any questions, I see there are a couple in the chat room. So, okay, so Natalie Acuna from St. Joseph Church, Mike, wants to know the painting behind you. Did you paint it?
No, unfortunately, I didn't. We had another Zoom conversation this afternoon with family, and we started tinkering with the Zoom room, and that particular picture is provided by them, just as Robert has the sunrise over the earth or sunset over the earth.
Okay, another question. Sometimes projects are problems. From an architect's perspective, what makes a project a success?
Easy answer first is the client. The clients are the most important part of the project. The second part to that would be doing things that fit into the area that you're doing them in and making them more accessible, more acceptable to the local planning commission and local city council.
So another question, was the wagon wheel sign preserved?
I don't believe so, but I don't know that for sure. I just don't think that that was something, maybe one of the old sign companies might have kept it. Sometimes they have yards full of old signs.
So those are all the questions.
So that's easy.
Yeah, that was pretty easy. Does anybody have any other questions? Now would be the time to type it in. This is from Ann Roberts. Just want to thank Mike for designing the most fabulous kitchen for our Wright Avenue home.
Aha! That was one of those other projects that got built. But Ann, just a note, Ann was also one of the responsible parties for the Episcopal Church work.
Okay. Anyone else?
I see Dave Weinstein in the audience there. He's only one of the 9 that I can see. It's good to see him again. He does a lot of work for El Cerrito Historic Society as well. He interviewed us, wow, years and years and years ago when he worked for, was it West County Times at that point, and wrote a whole article on design review. And that was always well done because it praised what we were doing very nicely.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
It's here. Yeah. Okay, I have another question. Did you design the middle school at St. Joseph's School?
No. That would have been an interesting project, but no, we didn't. I didn't work on any of the public schools but for one in the entire West County district.
And do you have a favorite project that you did in Pinole?
Yes. Well, it's a little hard between 2 different kinds of projects. One was the one next to the youth center, and the other one was the 3 houses going up the hill there.
Those 3 houses.
They
are
both
really
had,
nice.
yeah, they both had a nice kind of character to them. And the clients, in that case, a private client and then also a public client, were willing to spend a little bit of extra money on some of the detailing that makes the whole thing come together.
So one of our attendees loves those 3 houses. And are you going to do more of them?
I would say no, probably not. We moved our office from an office that we had been on San Pablo Avenue in Richmond. We stayed there for 31 years, and then we moved home, and that was in 2009, and about 2012, 14, we pretty well packed it in. I've retired now, and I work in the wood shop instead.
Another question, is there such a thing as a Michael Woldemar architectural style?
Yeah, this was asked of me last Friday. And so I did give it some thought. And it'll sound a little bit corny. I got to remember the exact words now. ordinary nostalgia. I think that the nostalgia part makes it much more acceptable to people. Everybody remembers where they grew up, what it looked like, what the town looked like, things like that. But I didn't have any interest in building monuments. And that's what the ordinary part was. They meant to fit where they were going. That's my answer today.
Any other questions? Hit the chat button. No? Okay. Michael, thank you. Earl Combs, I know you're listening. Thank you for those great photos. And thanks to everyone who donated photos to the Pinole Historical Society for the 2 books that we've done. Some of those photos you saw tonight in this presentation. I think they really added to Michael's presentation, especially the one taken around 1910 of the Captain's Cottage building. That is, I have 3 favorite photos of old Pinole, and that is one of them. So I'm very grateful to all the folks who donated photos to the Historical Society. We've got about 1,500 of them in our library. They're all digitized. They're on computers. They are on DVDs. They are on hard drives, and they're up in the cloud. So we're not going to lose them anytime soon. So with that, if there are no more questions, then I'm going to thank everybody for attending, and I'm going to stop the recording and wish you all a good weekend. And stay tuned for the next Pinole Historical Society program. I'm going to try to do one in August, but definitely in September.